Welcome to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, both a veteran spouse and the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. On each episode of our show, I will host different guests to learn more about the stories, unmet needs, and resources available to our military and veteran families. We're the show that's making space for your stories, so that here you know you're never alone. Welcome back to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast. This month, I'm joined by Chantel Dooley, who not only serves as the Director of Research and Impact at the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, or TAPS as it's more affectionately known, but is the proud surviving fiancé of a United States Air Force captain and is a fierce advocate for our surviving families. I'm grateful to have her join us this month to focus on navigating grief and loss in this particular military and veteran community. Whether you're connected to this community or not, you know that in May, we honor those we've lost through Memorial Day, though we also know it's not uncommon for civilians to miss the true meaning of this honored day. And as Chantel will tell you, while navigating loss of any kind is complex and highly individualized, in our military community, those layers of loss can compound. And so that's why I'm so grateful to have her join us today to help us better understand what this journey through grief can look like, both through her own personal experience and her work with surviving families, and to make sure that listeners know about the important programming that TAPS offers for these families. They do incredible work that everyone should know about, so I'd love to turn it over to you to really tell us a little bit more about you, both from the side of your connection to this community as well as the work that you do with TAPS.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Hannah. It is such a pleasure to be here and to be able to share the work that we do and the critical and life-saving resources and programs that we offer as the national nonprofit organization that is dedicated to providing comprehensive support and compassionate care to anyone who is grieving a loss in the military or veteran community. So my journey into the TAPS family started in 2016. I was engaged to marry the love of my life, Special Agent Alex Stanton, who proudly served this great country in the United States Air Force. And we were actually on our way to meet our wedding DJ when he was killed in a motorcycle accident. At the time, I was teaching high school, and being that I was not yet his wife, there was very little resources available for me. The members of his unit and even the chaplain at Luke Air Force Base where he was stationed, did a beautiful job of just surrounding me with lots of love and lots of support. But as life happens, everybody else's world kind of continues on, and, the mission continues and work had to get done. But I was kind of left behind and my world had just been turned upside down. So I had lost the person that I love more than anything in the world. I lost my future. I lost all my hopes, my dreams, everything. And everybody else's life kind of went back to normal and mine really didn't. So I was very grateful because Alex did leave me with a lot of love. And he had actually decided that we were going to get married over Memorial Day weekend. And he had also told me before he had died that when he died, he wanted to be laid to rest in Arlington. So before he had taken the position of special agent here at Luke Air Force Base, he was serving in the honor guard with the Air Force at Arlington Cemetery. And he loved the sentiment of what that service meant and the value and the honor that our loved ones are laid to rest because their life included service to our country. So I went to go visit him on what was supposed to be our wedding day. It happened to be Memorial Day. And all these people were walking around Arlington Cemetery in these TAPS shirts, and TAPS found me. And once they brought me into the TAPS family, I was surrounded by resources that were catered unique to me, to my needs, being that I, was young. I was not yet married, but yet they honored the love that Alex and I had. It wasn't about the title that I had at the moment that he died. And it wasn't about the fact that he didn't die in combat. He died stateside, just riding his motorcycle on his way to meet a wedding DJ to get married. We were living life. And as I grew with my grief through TAP support, I really started looking into what the organization did. And I was teaching high school at the time. I was also in school for my doctorate. And I was studying how people think and how people learn. And my degree actually has an emphasis in cognition and instruction. So I started looking for opportunities. I happened to interview for a position with TAPS, and I started doing impact assessment, which means that it was my job to make sure that our programs and services that we offer as an organization actually help people to heal. There are a lot of wonderful organizations out there that do really meaningful work to honor the families of the fallen. But what is so unique about TAPS is that it is so much more than just an event. At TAPS, yes, you're coming to an event, but the events that we are holding are very, very carefully curated in order to be a positive impact in the lives of people who are grieving. Everything down from how we communicate with survivors on logistics to attend, how we welcome survivors, how we plan our programming, is all very much dedicated to recognizing those who have lived, those who have served, and those who have died. And we honor that life and service by caring for everyone they loved and left behind.
Amazing. Well, first, thank you for just like being willing to share your personal story. I mean, you probably hear this a lot, but I certainly do with our population, that it is a misconception, like someone in your position can't take advantage of a benefit like TAPS because they didn't have that marriage or their partner died stateside or, whatever. And so I think that's something we try to bust every time we hear it. And I hope if nothing else comes away from that, from this conversation, that a myth or whatever is busted so that people know they can take advantage of you and your services no matter where their connection was, as long as that connection was to military service with the one they lost. So I'm really grateful for that because we hear it too often that people don't think they can take advantage of TAPS.
Absolutely. And the other thing that's really unique about the people that we serve is that we are here for anyone that is impacted by a loss in the military veteran community. We have survivors that call our 24/7 National Military Survivor Helpline, and they're a military spouse and their, service member is still presently serving, but they just lost their child. And, they're looking for resources, and TAPS is one of the largest organizations out there for military grief. And so they call us, not thinking that we're here for them, but we are absolutely here for them as well. We know that death doesn't recognize a duty status, and death doesn't recognize the next of kin. So death and grief are an emotional response to having loved and lost. And for that reason, we are here for anyone, regardless of how their person died or the duty status at the time of death.
That's huge. And see, I didn't even know that if the person that they lost wasn't connected, as long as they are. See,
Absolutely. We even have service members that we are providing support for that lost their spouse, and their spouse, was not serving actively, but they serve right alongside them. So we are here to offer support for them and their children and their parents and their families as well.
Oh, that's incredible. And you're right, right? We all, even listeners who might be listening who don't have the connection to this community, we can all unfortunately relate to the experience of loss and grief. But it is really individualized. No, right? It's incredibly individualized. So can you speak to a little more of kind of the nuances of what grief looks like depending on some of those unique circumstances, especially with this community?
Absolutely. So while we all share something in common, and what we share in common is the fact that we are living with grief, how we lost our person is unique. There are almost no two stories that are going to be exactly the same. There are incredible commonalities though, and one of the beautiful gifts that TAPS is able to offer is the benefit of peer support. What that means is when we have a survivor that calls in, grief is incredibly isolating. So once that loss happens and your world is just ripped out from underneath your feet, it is a natural reaction to feel so completely alone and to feel like you must be the only person in the entire world that has ever had to experience this, because it's so overwhelmingly, crushingly sad. You can't wrap your head around how anybody survives just that overwhelming shock and grief and sadness. And the powerful thing that we're able to offer as an organization is peer support. We are able to connect a surviving spouse who is pregnant at the time of loss and her husband died by suicide with another surviving spouse who was also pregnant at the time that her husband died by suicide. And she's a little further along in her grief, but to be able to have that common bond and to have that common shared experience is more powerful than anything that you could ever put a band-aid on or, be prescribed for. And to be able to listen to someone else talk and share their experience and have the ability to say, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. There are others that have gone through this and they have lived. Maybe I can take one step forward. Maybe I can lean into, seeking and receiving additional help in order to help me process what I'm experiencing and what I've lived through. We see this so often and so tragically with a lot of our surviving partners, but then also a lot of surviving partners immediately following a loss, a very common reaction we get is, I'm okay, I'll be fine. I'm worried about my kids. Or I'm okay, I don't need anything, but just help my kids. And we know that all too well. And the beautiful thing about how we structure our programming is we do everything is very family style oriented. We recognize the importance of addressing unique grief needs for each individual family member, but then there's also that component of addressing grief as a family. Because it's not just my loss, it's not just my child's loss. It's our loss together when birthdays happen, when anniversaries happen, when holidays come. And how do you handle those moments together as a family unit? And then, yes, also in those quiet moments when you are alone.
Yeah. No, I mean, first of all, you're like spouting our philosophy, too. Like we're all about peer support, but we don't have those peers who have that lived experience in the way that y'all do. So it's so amazing to be able to know we have y'all as a partner to connect people when they're going through that, because we, of course, understand the power of peer support, regardless of what we're going through. And then I love hearing about the family perspective, because similarly in our experiences with participants and just living this life, loss or not, we're always putting everyone before ourselves, always putting our kids or our spouse while they're there before our spouse. And I remember one of my colleagues came on and shared her loss story on the podcast last year. Said she just went through all the steps. She did the checklist of like, these are the things I'm supposed to do, the funeral, the benefits, take care of my daughter, get this. And she was like, I should be good. I did the things. I went to the group. Checklist, but was coming from it with that mentality of like, I need to get the things done. I need to take care of the things, not I need to take care of myself. And then had the letdown way after when it all came. So I can understand like that's common, and that it's really cool that to know your program is focused around helping people really check in on and take care of themselves, like on a real visceral level that is needed during that time.
Absolutely. And I love how you brought up about the checklist thing. So everything that we do within TAPS is centered around our TAPS bereavement model of care. And this is an incredible model that was published in Military Psychology. And it actually comes from the founders of grief models. And they're like world-renowned experts in grief, in bereavement. And it's actually an entire field called thanatology.
Okay.
And TAPS is part of the Association of Death Education and Counseling, where we have phenomenal members of our advisory board that are considered the founders of evidence-informed practices for how we help people grieve and how people mourn. So our TAPS bereavement model is built on 3 phases. And we recognize that when a loss happens, you have really 2 kind of different things that are competing. One of them is just like you mentioned, you have those tasks that need to be done. People need to be called and notified. You know, logistics need to be handled, legal issues need to be handled, arrangements for a funeral, burial, life insurance, you know, closing, all of that has to be done. But then you also have the emotional side that goes along with that, which you're trying to handle all of the checklist items while you're also experiencing shock, disbelief, anger, sadness, depression, loneliness, isolation, lack of hope, fear. And then you pile on top of all of that, you know, all of the family members and the well-wishers that want to help, they want to be there, they want to support, but you know, it could be a good thing or it could be a stressful thing, you know, depending on the person who's there. So you have all of this going on simultaneously. And, you know, at that moment in time, getting help to address and process your grief emotions is probably not at the top of that checklist.
Right.
But the beautiful thing about TAPS is we recognize that. And so the way that we cater our outreach and how we start our introduction to the family is focused on getting those checklist items done and handled very efficiently and effectively. So that way you can have the time to focus on those grief emotions.
Yeah.
We notice, and so that's why the first phase of that model is really safety and stabilization, making sure that survivors are safe, making sure that they have their basic needs met. For some survivors, you know, that is figuring out how they're going to cover their rent or their bills, because the moment the death happens, in most instances, that paycheck stops.
Yeah.
So, you know, making sure we have immediate funds and a plan in place so that they don't need to worry or stress about basic household things. We can help step in and take care of those checklist items. And we're also building that foundation for a healthy grief journey by addressing some of those immediate emotional needs. We also know that along with the grief emotion, sometimes, depending on the cause of death, is also trauma. And while trauma and grief can happen at the same time, even when the trauma symptoms subside, the grief will still remain. So just because somebody is able to sleep at night, or they're able to eat now, or they're able to focus better, does not mean that they're not grieving. It means that those trauma response symptoms have subsided. So that's really important for us as well. And then the leading cause of death among all new survivors connecting with TAPS are death by suicide. And we know that survivors of a suicide loss are at a greater risk of experiencing suicidal thoughts themselves. And so for us, we are also doing an assessment to assess risk and to make sure that those survivors, if they are not safe or they need that additional support, that they are connected with local resources and support right in their own community.
Incredible. Yeah, that's important. And then I love you spoke a little bit about kind of these layers of, right, there's your individual response, there's the family piece, right? If you have that children, you know, in the home, your immediate family, and being concerned about them and how they're reacting. You also have the other people in that individual's life and in your life. And as you mentioned, and you know, I've heard and even experienced in my own other grief journeys of like, not everyone grieves in the same way. And like you said, sometimes that can cause stress when there are expectations of how one should or shouldn't be grieving. And then also, so I wanted you to feel free to elaborate on anything more about that, but also knowing that the military has such a strong community and there is then the loss at that level. And how do these things play together?
That's a really good question. So we talk a lot in grief and bereavement about multiple losses. And there are different types of grief that people can experience. And there's so many factors that impact what the grief journey looks like for survivors that it is really unique. And it does require customized care by peer professionals who have been trained and who know what to look for, but who have also walked in that journey in those shoes. The piece about being a part of the military community is really profound for so many survivors because just like you mentioned, the community takes care of their own. And, a loss happens and you see the spouses clubs come in and the meal trains are organized and, you everybody pitches in and helps with childcare or laundry or, whatever they need, taking care of yard work, which is a beautiful gift that the military can offer. The other part of that, though, is life continues on. And for those survivors, you are no longer a part of that active military community. You're not going to be PCSing again. You're not going to be, going for the promotions. Your connection to that community has passed. And for those survivors, and for that reason, TAPS is here. We are a whole entire national community of survivors that were once a part of that military community. And now, sadly, we are no longer an active part. But the beautiful thing about TAPS is we have wonderful partnerships with the military, with military casualty, with military local commanders. And when we're coming to local seminars or local events, we reach out to them and say, hey, we're going to be here. We'd love for you to come by and, give a warm welcome to the survivors that are going to be here right in your own backyard. And do you know that we've never been turned down? They always show up, and every single one of them in their speeches is there because they themselves are honoring the life and legacy of their fallen brothers and sisters who served in the military.
I get it.
And it never fails. It never fails. And it's a beautiful thing to bear witness to because they themselves, in one way, shape, or form or another, always say, I should have done more for his wife, or I should have done more for his kids. And the truth of it is, they probably did everything just perfectly for that wife and those kids. It's just life continues on. And that's okay. We know that. We're here, and you know what? They're showing up for them now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I've definitely heard that, from the veteran family community too, when loss of a post-service veteran, they might be plugged into a community like ours and then be like, oh, am I not part of this anymore? We certainly say, yes, you absolutely are. But then also to be able to connect with others who have felt that loss of community. Because even if you have people saying, no, 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 you are, that doesn't mean that it's not also felt.
absolutely.
So another thing you mentioned briefly, which I think is really interesting, is like like I imagine loss in general can be traumatic, but obviously there are layers of that with how the death may have occurred and kind of being able to differentiate between the trauma response and reaction and the grief journey and how that manifests, but also like how you tackle that with somebody, how you kind of separate that out when that's happening. I didn't know if there was anything more you wanted to say to that.
Absolutely. So everything is dependent on the individual person and what their needs are. Research states that when the loss happens suddenly, unexpectedly, and traumatically, that the trauma symptoms, it is very natural for someone to experience a traumatic response simultaneously along with the grief. So grief, by definition, is the loss of a person, a place, or an idea. It is an emotional response, whereas trauma tends to manifest in physical responses. Most of our survivors that are connecting with us are grieving a death of their loved one who died suddenly, traumatically, and unexpectedly, which means that for a very significant part of the community that we serve, they are living with trauma simultaneously. We have heard, our veterans and our service members that struggle with post-traumatic stress. We see that manifest in survivors following a loss, especially when they were there at the moment of death, when they were there to witness the death, or if it was a loss by suicide and they were there at the moment that their loved one took their life. And the trauma from not only experiencing that, but also from the guilt of not being able to prevent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot for a person to carry. And for that reason, we have a very dedicated suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention program. We also have published our TAPS postvention model, which is very, very similar to our TAPS bereavement model, and they're essentially mirror images of each other. And we did that very intentionally because we recognize that there are three very distinct phases of grief, but it's not linear. It's not like everybody starts,
Yeah.
at go and then advances through. And then once they get through, they're done, they're healed. There's a concept called oscillation, which is what was put out and published by Strobe and Schutt in the dual process model of bereavement. And they talk about oscillation and how you can be having a really bad day and not remembering how to brush your teeth in the morning because you're so overwhelmed with trauma and grief. And then the very next day, you could be, feeling much better and feeling okay and able to function and go to work and have a good day at work. And the key to a healthy grief journey is being able to allow and recognize that those moments are going to happen. And it can be a same thing as a person is living with trauma and grief at the same time. You can experience a traumatic response. And a quick, for example, when COVID happened, and we were just starting to meet back in person again, and we were having to implement all the COVID precautions, and we were needing to take temperatures. The thermometers that we were using to take everybody's temperatures were the forehead thermometers. And it was, a forehead thermometer reading, and you put it on the person's head and you took their temperature. Well, we had survivors that had traumatic reactions to holding up a device near their head.
Yeah.
And that for them was incredibly emotionally stimulating, and it stimulated their traumatic response because of the way their loved one died. And so for us, because we are evidence informed and we are research based, everything that we do, we take all of these factors into consideration when we're designing our programs and our services. That we are very mindful that everything that we do is first and foremost to help improve the lives of those that are living with grief and trauma. And then second, to help them grow with their grief in a healthy way.
Incredible. You made me think with that example. I actually ran into one of your colleagues at an event last week in San Antonio, but is also a survivor, and she was, I guess, someone we were in the conversation was asking about, like, timeline, like the grief timeline, because I think she had said, very proudly, oh, it's this last week was like 28 years, since their passing. And so this person asked about, okay, well, like, how do you feel now, you know? And she talked about, at least for her, these different time points of like moving through it or having like an anniversary like trigger, whether it made sense or not, you know, certain things triggered something and she felt really not okay, whether it be for that moment, for that week, for that month, whatever. And so I thought about that as you were talking about, you know, it's like not linear, yes, but then also people think, oh, well, I should be done with this, right? At some point. So I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to say to that point of whether that's anniversaries or memories and like and how you kind of help people through that when maybe it's been quite some time, you know, since the loss actually occurred, but things come up as they do.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you brought that up because that is a huge challenge for so many survivors that we help. And I'm going to be emotional when I share this, but we recently just completed a study on our young adult population. And young adults are military survivors who are between the ages of 18 to 30. And what we found in our 30 plus years of serving the military and veteran survivor community is that, as kids who were bereaved as a child, as they grew and once they turned 18, they didn't want to go into the same programming that their mom was going to. They wanted,
Yeah.
they needed their own space because they weren't a child anymore, but yet they didn't want to be sitting through the same workshop sessions as their mom. So we created a young adult program. So we just did a study on these young adults, which are military and veteran survivors between the ages of 18 to 30. Some of them had grown up coming to TAP's Good Grief Camp, which is what we offer for children under the age of 18. And some of them had not. Some of them lost their person before they were born. Some of them lost their person as they were under 18, and some of them lost their person at age 19.
Mhm.
So we had a big mix. And what we found in that study is that those survivors that had volunteered to be a mentor to a newly bereaved child at Good Grief Camp. So they had a loss, they're at a healthy place in their grief journey, and they come back to TAPS for our Good Grief Camps. They put on a mentor t-shirt, and from Friday to Sunday, their job is to be a source of support for a bereaved child that is coming to our Good Grief Camp. And that's how we kind of wrap around that peer support model as well, and even pass it down to the next generation, because they have the ability to look at the children and say, I lost my dad too. I lost my brother too. I miss them too. It's okay. But when we were doing this study, we interviewed one of the young adults, and she had lost her dad, and he had died by suicide when she was a baby.
Mhm.
And she had shared that the thing that was the most hurtful, and now she's, 19. And the thing that was the most hurtful that anybody had ever told her is, well, how can you even miss them if you never even knew them?
Yeah. Ouch.
And, her loss was 19 years ago. And yeah, she never even knew her father, but it doesn't change the fact that she still grieves him.
Yeah.
And the same is true for so many kids that are also going to Good Grief Camp. I mean, we have children that are in the early childhood ages of 0 to 5. And then we have kids that are ages 5 and up. And how much of their person are they going to remember? We don't know. And that's not for us to say, and it's not for us to judge. And just because time has passed doesn't change that imprint that has been left on our hearts.
Mhm.
And I mean, we have survivors that lost their person in Vietnam that come and volunteer with us.
Yeah.
And it never, I don't want to use the word it gets easier. I want to say that we get better at managing our grief.
Yeah.
We get better at recognizing when we're feeling sad and connecting that to, I'm having a hard day. I miss my person. We get better at recognizing, I'm not feeling very good. And, the anniversary is also coming up. So maybe that's why. And that's the wonderful thing about TAPS is we work with survivors, not to shut it away, not to deal with it and put it in a box and bury it in the closet, but to recognize when those emotions are coming up and to honor the lives that were lived and the service that was given to our country rather than the moment and the manner of death.
That's incredible. And I love that you brought up the example with the young adults and being able to highlight Good Grief Camp because I've heard really great things about that as well. And you've done an incredible job about talking about what TAPS does and how they do it throughout our conversation. But I do want to make sure we reserve room for like anything else. We really want to make sure people know about what TAPS has to offer them, what support they provide, programming, whatever it might be. Anything you feel like we haven't touched on that's really important.
Oh, I absolutely. Well, I would love to leave all of your listeners with some tools for their toolkit because this is great, that we're sharing all this information, but the reality is we're all going to be faced with having someone we love experience a loss.
Mhm.
And what do you do in that moment? Like, what is the right thing to do?
Oh gosh, yeah.
So the first and foremost thing we offer as helpful is to simply reach out without expectation of a response. And I want to clarify what I mean by that. You can have the best of intentions and want to help, want to help, want to help, but someone that's going through this, they could be so overwhelmed that it's not even feasible for them to reach out and respond back to you. They could be in shock, in denial, embarrassed, ashamed, and not knowing how to help. So the most helpful thing is to, send a text, send a message, leave a note, write a card, and just, let them know it's okay to not respond. I'm here for you. I'm going to check back up with you in 3 days or however much time, it works for you. But there's no obligation for you to acknowledge that I'm reaching out, but I'm here and I'm going to reach back out again.
Yeah.
And then actually reach back out again in 3 days.
Yeah.
and kind of same thing. And just not expecting them to task you, but instead to offer that, hey, you need to know I'm right here with you. This is a lot, no pressure. I'm gonna reach back out in a couple days. Or, hey, I'm driving by your house tonight. Do you want McDonald's or do you want Chipotle? Like, very, very simple choices where it can be very easy for them to say yes or no,
Mhm.
or choice A or choice B. Not, do you want me to bring you dinner? Because that's kind of ambiguous, right? Like they're probably not eating and they probably aren't thinking about food. But instead shifting it to say, I'm making lasagna or I'm making Frito pie. Which one do you want?
Yeah.
But you're getting one, it's
Yeah.
coming. And then
Straight to death.
something other very simple, very basic as, just doing anything you can to acknowledge what has happened with just very simple phrases such as, I'm sorry. They will be missed. This is tragic. I can't imagine what you must be going through. We're here. Try to avoid using minimizing phrases, which an example of a minimizing phrase is any word that starts with at least. Like, well, at least, he went fast, or at least he was doing something he loved, or at least he didn't suffer. Those are very challenging to swallow because it doesn't make it any easier. And then the other piece is to avoid saying words that, God doesn't give you anything that you can't handle, or, he only calls on his toughest soldiers, because in those moments immediately following a sudden traumatic and unexpected loss, it feels completely overwhelming. So those are some really helpful little tools. But the second and the most important call to action after, kind of those very helpful things to do immediately following a loss is to call TAPS. We are a national 24/7 organization. We have live helpline agents that are standing by 24/7, ready to answer that call. We get calls all the time from other spouses, from other neighbors, from friends, from, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, even military casualty will call us sometime and say, hey, I'm about to go deliver this notification. Can you walk me through what I need to say? Because I really want to get this right. And that's what we're here for. We're here to help. We're here to hold space for those really hard conversations and those really, really big experiences that can't even seem imaginable.
So use them.
Yes, we are 24/7. The other thing you can also do is you can just submit the survivor's contact information on our website 24/7, and that's taps.org. We just need very, very basic contact information so we can get in touch with the survivor, and our outreach will start immediately. And everyone needs to know that we don't give up. So even if we call them and they say that they're fine, they don't need anything, or they're not ready to talk just yet, or they don't even answer the phone, we don't go away. So we're going to send them a resource kit that is customized to their manner of loss and their generation. Meaning if we know that there's children under the age of 5 in the house and it's a death by suicide, we send resources for a death by suicide for children under the age of 5.
Wow.
And we build out those kits and they come right to their front door. So that way, even if survivors aren't ready to answer the phone when we call the first time, then maybe a couple days later, they get this beautiful kit that's been very carefully curated just for them. And it helps to bridge that level of trust with us so that we can help and we can support them.
Yeah, so many incredible things that you guys do. And I love, as organization based in social work research as well, like that focus of like being able to really understand where they're at, use the research to tailor, the resources and supports to them. And then in your role, you get the beauty of, really understanding the impact, which you've shared a lot about, but what else can you tell us about what you see that this programming does for survivors?
Oh my gosh. The biggest word that comes to the front of my mind is hope. And the second phrase would be meaning and purpose. There are so many very, very, very sad stories of loss and trauma and tragedy, especially among those of us that have loved someone whose life included service. And after living through something as traumatic as, losing them, hope is something that is so desperately sought after and people so desperately want, but it's really, really hard to get back after going through something like that. And so we hear over and over and over again from survivors that attend our sessions, from the calls that they make to our helpline, of how much more grateful they are for the gift of hope because they have been able to connect with TAPS and receive the support that we're able to offer. The other piece of that is meaning and purpose. I think as fundamental human beings, everybody at some point in time wants to know that their life means something and their life meant something. And even beyond that, we want to know that our people didn't die for nothing, that, they lived, they were a beautiful gift that we will hold forever in our hearts. And that because they died, we have a better outlook on life in terms of the relationships that we built, the hope that we've gained, and the different perspective that we have on our future because they lived and because we loved them and because we lost them. And that looks very different for everyone. You hear it a lot. People call it post-traumatic growth. And I can see a lot of that, but I also think it's so much bigger than that. And I mean, we have stories of survivors who have gone on to advocate at the national level for policy and legislative change, to improve the lives of military survivors, to improve the lives of our veterans, to improve the lives of our service members. And they name these bills and legislative initiatives in honor of their person. And I mean, my God, talk about leaving a legacy. But it's more than that, because yes, they lived, yes, they inspired it, but their survivors are who championed it. Their survivors are who gave it life and pushed it forward and made it happen. And you hear stories of moms that have gone back to college to become, social workers, to work with service members because, they want to be a source of support for someone in honor of their son's life. And I mean, what a beautiful gift. What a beautiful gift of how we are able to make the world a better place because we want it to mean something.
Very, very impactful, I'll say, right? No, but I think that that resonates so much, and I hope it resonates with our listeners. Because again, yes, we're a unique community, but unfortunately, loss is not. And on that, I think, you know, it's May when we're releasing this. We know that whether it's May when you're listening to this or not, and you know that is when we have Memorial Day. And I can certainly say, as someone who grew up, not connected to this community, I had a grandfather who served, who died when I was young, didn't talk to his family at all about his service. And that was like all I knew, the only connection I had to this. So there's a lot of us out there, right, who grow up thinking Memorial Day is a day we get off in the summer where we go to the lake and we have our barbecues and we have a good time. And that's all it is. Or what we hear so often, that it gets really convoluted with Veterans Day, and that it's, oh, we're honoring those who are serving and who have served. So one, I'd love you to speak to just like make sure we all really understand the meaning of this day, but also knowing that it can be one of those anniversaries or triggers, if you want to call it that, that can upset people. I know it took me years with my husband to understand that that was a difficult weekend for him and why, right? I was like, hey, you want to go to the lake with my family? And why are you being so weird? So what can you tell us that's really important to understand and be aware of for this day, whether we're civilians who may not understand, or whether it may be a difficult day for us?
Absolutely. So to your credit, Hannah, I'm also in that same boat you're in as well. I grew up, grandfather served, and I remember interviewing my grandfather for like a school book report that I had to do where I had to interview him, and I chose to interview him about his military service. But aside from that, that was really it. And, Alex had picked our wedding day, which would be over Memorial Day weekend. And we would have been, guilty just like that. And I choose to see it as I'm so thankful that he picked that, because had he not picked Memorial Day for us to get married, I probably wouldn't have been at Arlington Cemetery, and
Right.
I would not have been picked up by TAPS. But yes, there are three very distinctive days that are federal holidays that we honor those who have served. And Memorial Day is a very sacred day that is honoring all who have served and died. And, you see designation, there's not really a designation between pre 9/11 and post 9/11. And, we have war memorials on our nation's capital honoring and commemorating those lives lost in service to our country. We have service members that died on the battlefield, died back home, and died from visible and invisible wounds of war. It doesn't change their military service. And for us, Memorial Day is about honoring that. It's honoring the fact that they had the courage to raise their right hand and pledge to defend our freedom and did so, and they died. And so for us, Memorial Day is one of our most sacred days. And every year over Memorial Day weekend, we host the National Military Survivor Seminar and Good Grief Camp in Arlington, Virginia. And at this event, we welcome 2,000 military survivors, 500 military children, and 500 military mentors to our nation's capital to do just that, to focus and remember and honor those who have lived, those who have served, by caring for all those they loved and left behind. 4th of July, celebrating our nation's independence, beautiful holiday that is very incredibly important. And it's a holiday that so many of our loved ones was their favorite holiday. So that can be a very emotional holiday for a lot of military survivors as well, because a lot of our loved ones, they loved their country.
Yeah.
So that's why they chose to serve. And then Veterans Day is all about honoring all who serve. And at that moment, for Veterans Day, we honor our military mentors and we honor our survivors who they themselves are veterans as well. So a lot of families are dual service.
Mhm.
And, one person has passed and the other one is a survivor, but they themselves are also a veteran as well.
And what advice might you have for if it is a hard day or a hard weekend, whether that's Memorial Day or just any of those moments we talked about that might happen over time where you are having that awareness of like, oh, today is hard. I'm missing this person. I don't know if you just want to leave our listeners with anything. What can we do in those moments?
Excellent question. In those moments when life gets hard, the first thing is to lean into your support system. Call a friend, call a family member, lean into support and care where you can. Avoid isolating. It is our natural tendency for depression or loneliness or anxiousness to isolate and just, get in bed and pull the covers over your head and, will it to go away. That's a very natural reaction to have, but lean into those that are your support network. TAPS is here 24/7. If you ever want or need someone, a caring live person to talk to that understands the military community, you don't have to be grieving someone to call. Just give our helpline team a call, and even just to say hi and thank them for answering the phone and being there. And then the third thing that I would say would be to get involved. Find a cause that you are passionate about or something that you believe in that you can support. Whether you can support them financially with a donation, whether you can support them with your time in person, or you can just support them even by crafting a social media message and
Right.
posting it on your social media network. Finding something to get behind and give your time and energy and space to is a beautiful gift to be able to give. Because even if you're sharing information about TAPS on your own social network, you never know who you're connected with, who can see it and who could benefit from it.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the most incredible stories of how survivors find us. And most of it comes from word of mouth. Somebody heard something and, oh my gosh, I have the perfect organization for you to call. So.
No, I love that because and that's what I have especially loved as we talked about doing this episode, and then certainly as we've really talked through all these things, is that I think especially on this topic, there really is something to take away no matter who you are as a listener, right? No matter whether you're a part of this community or not, you lost someone or love someone and want to support someone who may have experienced this loss. So I actually really love that last call to action because again, like you're saying, you never know the power of just making sure someone's aware of something that could really make this huge impact that we've talked about today. So I'm just incredibly grateful to have you on and for you again to to not just share the work that you do, but your own connection and experience is really powerful. And for those listening, I got a lot out of today. I even learned something that I didn't know before, so I certainly hope you all did. And we thank you for listening. And Chantel, we thank you for joining.
It's been a pleasure and an honor. So thank you so much, Hannah, and the Veteran Spouse Network for having us on today. This is such a monumental month for us, and I hope that anybody who's listening will connect survivors with our support and care. We're here for them. We love them. We love you guys, and thank you.
Thank you. And you'll listen to us next month. Have a good one. Thanks again for joining us on the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. We thank you for listening today and hope today's session left you feeling a little more connected or gave you some insight into the experiences of our military and veteran families. Don't forget to check us out at veteranspousenetwork.org to learn more about how our military and veteran families can receive the support they deserve.